Hi there and welcome to our webinar today, everything you need to know about successfully setting up a data management platform in the cloud. We're Victor Davis. So just a few bits of housekeeping before we start. We're recording this session so we can send you a link afterwards if you want to watch it again or share it with colleagues. We'll also send you a copy of the slides and you'll be able to download those afterwards so you can pass them to anyone else in your organisation that you think may be interested. If you're interested in a private rerun for a group of colleagues, that's something that we can arrange. Just drop us a note afterwards and we will set it up for you. During the webinar, all the lines are muted, so if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. And colleague Rachel is on the line to take questions as they come in, and we'll deal with those at the end of the session. And if we run out of time and your question hasn't been asked, we will follow up with you separately afterwards. So just briefly to introduce the two presenters today, we've got Martin Pace, who's our VP Managed Services, who's going to take you through the bulk of the material. And then, as I said, Rachel Clinton, Business Development, will pick up the end with any questions. So now I'm going to hand over to Martin.
Hi, everyone. So I'm VP of Managed Services at Victor Davis. So Managed Services is one of our three main practices in the UK. So a little bit about me. So my career history is in business analysis, and my main focus and motivation is ensuring our services deliver continuous value. That's what motivates me. My career has always been based on delivering business value, and hopefully you see that through this webinar. So a little bit about the agenda for today. So we're going to start off with a brief introduction of Victor Davis and our managed services practice. We're going to go in a bit more detail about a cloud data platform and define it and what the problems we often see are with cloud data platforms. We're going to talk a little bit about the Victor Davis Data Delta method and how that helps address the problems we see with cloud data platforms. We're going to talk about the thin slice approach and how that works in practice, the best place to start, some technology selection, and how we've delivered this model of operation in our client organizations, and then some questions at the end. So the first section is the introduction to Victor Davis. So Victor Davis is separated into three major delivery practices. So we have advisory and strategy. We have the delivery practice who typically deliver projects, large projects, and then we have the managed services practice, which is the one that I lead. In terms of geography, so we're a global organisation. Our main centres are in the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, but we also have teams in India, North America, and the USA, and also in Mexico as well. So we have a global operating team. In terms of capabilities, so we provide those services across many technology spaces. So this is just a high-level view of all those technologies that we're currently working on. So we range from on the left-hand side in the governed space, so working on information governance and digital transformation strategies and tactics, and then that crosses all the way through foundations. So we do a lot of work in MDM and data integration, through analytics, and then ultimately we're doing more and more work in the IoT space and blockchain and things like that in that sort of connect domain. So we cover the whole data spectrum through our services. So a little bit more about who we are and what motivates us. So these are our values, and we live by them across the global organization. I'm sure most of you would have seen these sort of values on other companies' websites, but we think our values set us apart in many ways. So hopefully you'll see through this presentation how our process exemplifies these values, and we'll return to these values at the end, and I'll put some examples on them as to where I can evidence that we live by these values. So first of all, let's define what a cloud data platform is. So many organizations define this differently. There isn't consensus online or in the community about what a data platform is in the cloud. So I'll do a little bit at the beginning just to define how we see it, so everybody is on the same page. So what is a typical customer data landscape? So it usually looks something like this: a very complex process delivering data from the outside to the center. I appreciate this view is quite zoomed out. It's deliberately zoomed out just to visualize what the complexity that we often see. So this is a pretty average view. We see much worse. We don't often see much better. Often we see the core boxes in the middle are logical, well thought out business objectives, but there's not enough focus about how the data gets there. So you can see there's a lot of complexity working out within. Each one of these boxes represents some sort of processing, some sort of change being made to data. And at each stage of that, there's an opportunity for errors or bias to creep in. So looking at a view like this, how confident would you be that the data in the middle is accurate when you see the amount of complexity that surrounds it? So in terms of the sort of data that we'd expect to see in a cloud data platform, so we very much work on these data domains, and we work to model them as early as possible in our engagement. So we'd expect to see all of these domains represented in a cloud data platform. So just to talk you through the diagram, so the main ones are in the middle, but in terms of the arrows, so the data quality, importance, and the lifespan arrows, the higher the domain is in that list, the greater the value we would usually find to the business. And on data volumes and change frequency, the lower it is in the list, the more we would see in terms of data and how quickly it changes. So that's the sort of things we'd expect to see in our cloud data platforms. So what problems do we often see? So most customers we work with, we find that they have a spider web of manual intervention. So thinking back to that diagram a few slides ago, that supports the business. But there's often questions of how much it supports the business and how accurate that data is. So why does a typical organization need that level of manual intervention to serve those reports in the middle of that image? We find many contributing factors to that. The resounding answer stems to be from imperfect data at the outside, and then certain agendas or errors as it's being processed to produce those reports in the middle. Often they are misinterpreted. So we've put a few examples here. So think to yourself, and most customers think they have a clear view of how they define a customer, when actually when you start asking some challenging questions, it's clear that they don't understand what a customer is. So a good example is in insurance. Is a customer somebody that requested a quote? Is it somebody that has a policy, or is it somebody that's had a policy in the past? And we work with insurance companies that can't answer that question, yet they believe they are reporting on their customers. We also see a lot of complexity in technology, in people and process, and differing organizational values and objectives in their cloud data platforms. So they're trying to do too many things in too many different ways with technology, rather than focusing on what their values are and objectives. So in terms of technology, how would we define a typical cloud data platform? So most of our customers believe it's one tool provided by a single vendor that solves all of their problems. We find it's rarely the case. It happens occasionally, but often it's a collection of tools that are all working together to solve different business problems in different ways. So there is no one size fits all approach. It needs to be a collection of objectives and tools. So hopefully that's defined how we view a cloud data platform for you. So in terms of the Victor Davis Data Delta method and how that applies to cloud data. So the Victor Davis Data Delta approach. So the fundamental issue that we try and address is that our customers have data and they have business people who need the information, and they have to connect the two. So most of our customers think it's a simple bridging exercise. You just have to cross the data delta really quickly. You give the data to the business people and everyone's happy. That's a common mistake. people think technology is the answer to the problem. It isn't. It's about following a process from top to bottom across your organization. If you're planning on just putting tools and technology in place to bridge that gap, you're pretty much certain to fail. So the data delta approach provides a lot more structure to bridging that gap between data and the business people. So remember that information is in the eyes of the receiver. So an average business person would have high expectations of the data if they're going to make decisions upon it. So what sort of things would we expect them to be able to want to see? Well, they expect their data to be properly defined. So we've already mentioned examples around the concept of a customer. We often see that the concept of month differs within a business. So having clear definitions helps make sure that the business people are talking in the same terms. It needs to be complete. So if you wanted to look at, if the business team wanted to look at sales data, they need a clear view of all the sales, not just a certain domain. It needs to be sufficiently accurate, and to be confident it's accurate, it needs to be measured. So that implies we need to have some sort of quantitative measure of that data to make sure it's accurate. It needs to be meaningful, so it needs to have context. So there's no point having your sales data unless you understand your missed opportunities data, so you get a full view of the context. It needs to be up to date, or at least out of date and not out of date, and it needs to be available to the right people at the right time. So that's the key principles that run through the data delta approach. In terms of putting some labels on each of those bands in the data delta. So again, the data must be governed and owned. It needs to be well described. It needs to be high quality. It needs to have principles of access established. So that includes life cycles, storage, privacy, and security. It needs to be used and shared in a strategic way, and it needs to be controlled. So limited to only those that need to see it, and it needs to be well established and well implemented. So the key tenets that run through the Victor Davis data delta approach. So we need a plan. So this is an overriding strategic direction. It isn't a written document that just describes all the steps you have to follow. It's not a schedule, which often people get confused with a true plan. It's not a list of tasks. It's the things you need to do to define success. So we often find working with our stakeholders, we ask them the question, how will you know when you have succeeded? And then we usually work back from there to form a plan before that. The other key tenet to the data delta approach is you don't know the future. So that might sound a little contradictory to you need a plan, but you need to be able to understand all the business value points that you're working towards, but only be focusing on the immediate ones at one time, because you don't know what's going to change in your business. How many businesses stand still? You need to be able to evolve and be agile to your changing business. You don't need to do everything in one go, and you need to look at incremental benefits. So that's what this webinar is mainly going to focus on. So a lot more detail on those two in the following few minutes. And the other key thing is all of the data delta includes people, process, and tools. Every part of your business needs to consider all of those three things. Otherwise, your IT-led initiatives are likely to fail. So focusing on that incremental approach where you don't need to know everything at the beginning. So this is where the thin slice approach is really effective and works in practice. So this visualizes a thin slice of your data delta. So finding a small slice of your data, which if you addressed every aspect of it, it would make a significant improvement to the organization. So delivering some value. We recommend you're realistic. So for many organizations, this means crossing the data delta for a specific key subset of your data. So I've used a couple of examples already. So maybe picking out your sales data or a single view of customer. We recommend you take a step back and think and consider that your organization could finally have one timely repository of all your important data. So focus on a key milestone that you're aiming for. There's a reason we draw it as a vertical line. Vertical slices are often the business-led initiatives. Horizontal slices tend to be more IT-led initiative, but we can dig a little bit deeper on that in the following slides. So what's an example of a thin slice? So an example of a thin vertical slice is a problem. We need to better understand the performance of a key business process and system. So a business problem. So in order to address that business problem, following the data delta, we'd look at governance. So we'd agree who owns that data in that business process and system. We'd model it to understand it. We look at the data quality to make sure it's consistent and we can remediate it where possible, as early as possible. We look at the access. We locate where it is. We make sure the right people will understand who needs to have access to it and under the appropriate security control. We'd identify the other people that the data needs to be shared with that might not need the direct access, but they need to be able to see the data on a regular interval. And then we look at implementation. Now, no, implementation is at the bottom of the list. That's the last thing we think about with our approach. The tools we choose are important, but it's important we establish all of the requirements before we get to the tools and the implementation. So the definition of success is that we've solved that business problem and delivered the value. Moving across to the horizontal slice. So if you were to do a slice of your delta just focusing horizontally, you'd be looking at technology. So in this exact same example, we're just saying we need an analytics tool. So we're not considering the business process and system, we're just trying to implement an analytics tool. And all we would have to do in this slice is look at the implementation and perform a one-time extract and establish an analytics tool. Sounds much more simple, but the impact of that is that we're almost bound to represent to undertake or start a big undertaking. We're unlikely to deliver any tangible, bankable business benefit if we're not understanding what those benefits are up front, and it naturally leads to a discussion of prioritization. So that's a big project, implementing an analytics tool across a business, rather than focusing on a specific business process. There are some examples where a horizontal slice works, a little bit more on that in a minute. But generally, it's limited to these technical projects rather than business-led initiatives. Certainly, with your first initial thin slices, we recommend vertical slices are the way to go. At some point, you want to move on from taking these vertical slices and focus on building out these horizontal capabilities. But this should be a long way down your journey and after establishing business value. So ultimately, this equates to activating a particular principle in your data delta. So there's no requirement to do this for multiple principles at once. There's no requirement to do it at all. But you might target a specific horizontal domain first, something like data storage or reference data management, and you might trigger an initiative to deliver that across your business. Be careful. As I said earlier, they're often IT-led initiatives, which can be risky and time-consuming. And we got some of the pros and cons of the two approaches later on. So we have the two approaches. We have one-off. So this is what we often see our customers embarking on, is a one-off project to build a cloud data platform with a single tool or a few in one major project. So this is extremely risky. So the cost of failure is extremely high. It's time-consuming, often has a long approval process, and there's a significant impact from change in people, process, and technologies. To unpack that a little bit, so how confident can you be that you're going to get it exactly right? So in a one-off scenario, if you make a bad decision, it will take much longer before you realize, because you haven't delivered for a while. You often won't realize your investment for a long time. And focusing on that last point about frequent change in people, process, and technology. So how many of your businesses stand still for a year or two's project? Often you'll find that the people have moved on, the processes have changed, or the technology is innovated in the time being, and actually by the time you deliver, you're behind the times in your business and in IT terms. So that's why we encourage an incremental approach. So taking that thin slice or multiple thin slices and regular value points being delivered. So it's a cheaper upfront investment if the cost of failure is lower. So if you do choose the wrong technology, or you do deliver your project in the wrong way, you realize much sooner and you have much larger opportunity to change. The incremental approach also has a much more of a momentum building model. So by delivering a project, you get more buy-in from your business, and then you're more likely to get future projects approved. We encourage our customers to think about it in a chess analogy. So how often, if you were playing chess, would you know what your third, fourth, and fifth moves would be? You likely wouldn't. So you also wouldn't know how many moves it's going to take to win the game. So you wouldn't approach a game of chess in a one-off model. You approach it in an incremental model. You'd be looking at the moves on the table and understanding what the best move is to take as the context that you're working in changes, i.e. what your opponent's doing. So that's our model for the thin slice. So we've got some examples of where we've used this with our existing customers and how we use it in the managed services team. So just a quick introduction of what we do in managed services. So as I've said earlier, we're split into three practices. We have the advisory practice, we have the delivery services practice, and the managed services practice. So the managed services team are very much, we're built of people who aren't technology experts or specific technology evangelists. They are people who are motivated by providing that consistent, reliable service, and they're motivated by delivering business value. And we believe in the thin slice approach to what we do. So every customer we work with, we work in a thin slice approach. We know our customers in great detail, so we can support them in following that thin slice model and advise them on the direction to go. But we're also there just to support them in their internal discussions and initiatives as well. So to introduce what we do in the team, so we have a broad range of skills. We've existed for 20 plus years. We follow ITIL best practice. We use best of breed products, and the main services we deliver are support, full managed services, and cloud infrastructure. We have a 24/7 follow the sun service desk, and we have the concept of the Data Delta platform as a managed service, where we help our customers build these thin slice platforms in the cloud and then deliver it to them as a service, working together to grow it. In terms of how our approach differs and how we differentiate ourselves from our competitors, so we have a really flexible catalog approach. So we don't have a lot of our customers, or sorry, a lot of our competitors will have a bronze, silver, gold type model. They might have different packages of how they deliver their services. We don't do that. We have a flexible portfolio, and I've got some more detail of that in a minute. We're technology agnostic, so we're not wedded to any particular vendors. We're not we don't evangelize about specific technologies. We help our customers find a match. As a group, we have all of the technologies and skills that I talked about earlier, and we have access to those people. We follow a DevOps as a service model, and I can explain a little bit more on that and how that equates to ITIL in a little bit. And we focus on the people, process, and then the technology. So going into a little bit more detail about all of those things. So our catalog approach. So we have a catalog of technology agnostic flexible services. So what that means is we have a portfolio of different services that, depending on the customer, we can design a customized service package. So we may have customers who may want to adopt some responsibilities themselves and outsource some to us, and we help build that package with them to make sure it's the right structure for them and delivers the value that they expect. The other key thing we do is we share learning between these services. So we make sure that if a customer is using a particular service and we come up with an improvement or we innovate it, we make sure that learning is passed on to other customers as well. So we have a growing and evolving relationship with the customers. Just to explain this diagram a little bit, so the top is the customers, and the bottom is our technical services, and each of the services in the middle is a package effectively, and that changes with many of our customers. That changes on a month-to-month basis. As I said earlier, we're technology agnostic. That doesn't mean we don't like technology. We love technology. We just don't believe in a one-size-fits-all approach. So this is just a snapshot of the technologies we're working with. This is probably the technologies we work with this week. We work with, at the last count, over 100. Many people in our team work with different customers, different platforms, different technologies in an hour, let alone a day. We're not scared to take on new technologies, which is why we don't say we do specific things and we don't do other technologies. We're confident that our process and methods mean that we can adopt pretty much any technologies, and we move with the market and with the technology trends. What that means is we're a good partner to select technology for your organization. So we find most of our customers choose their technology based on these sort of criteria. So most features, most exciting. Often we hear it had the best stand at a conference, which always worries us. And often we hear that of the safest option approach, that if you choose a particular vendor, then you're not going to get fired. It was the one that was the top of the list on the recommendations. That's not how we work. We work with our customers to identify the objectives and values and what they want to get out of their technology. We help find the right supplier that fits. So we often see customers and suppliers don't fit in their values and the way they like to operate. So we help find the supplier that fits that particular customer, and we work with the customer to research and consult with the experts. So we have the right expertise in the Victor Davies group that we can help bridge the gap of any business problem and find the technologies that exist in the market space that match, and we can follow a quantified approach to selecting them. So back to that one-stop shop view. So because of our linking with the rest of the business, Managed Services crosses all of the technical domains across the business. So we have people and knowledge and access to all of the absolute technology experts in all of those spaces, and we're not afraid to bring them into our team when we need to talk directly to customers. So one of our key delivery models is DevOps as a service. So we found traditional support has gradually transitioned to managed service model with an increased focus on outsourcing. And this has developed the ITIL principles, but also we've seen that meanwhile the DevOps philosophy has creeped in. There's a lot of discussion about how DevOps and ITIL can work together in a managed services model. We strongly believe it can. So a lot of organizations are trying to choose between the two, and we apply the two together. So a couple of visualizations here. So we see a lot of customers that are focusing on chasing and resolving low priority incidents and problems instead of neglecting change initiatives on their systems. So I ask you to think about in the systems that you may be involved in, what's more important, solving a problem that has a small business impact or delivering a significant business improvement. Most of you will say delivering a business improvement, but we see often with our customers that's not happening. They're focusing only on support and neglecting the advancement of the business. So the way we deliver our services is we follow a DevOps ITIL hybrid, where we have a prioritized backlog, and all support and change goes into the same backlog, and then we work with our customers to prioritize that backlog and make sure we're delivering the value as early as possible. So we actually follow the thin slice approach at that real granular level of how we deliver our services, that we are on a weekly basis taking a slice of the backlog and delivering it based on business value. In terms of the clients we've worked with, so this is just a snapshot of the customers we've worked with, and I just want to get on a few of them, given a bit more detail about what we did and how we used the thin slice approach. So one of these customers, they had a translation budget that was due to increase from 5 million euros a year to 25 million euros. They came to us for a solution as to how they can stop that growth in that translation budget. So we worked with them to find the best tools for the job. So we did the whole technology selection process, and we assembled an alliance of suppliers. So we created a group of experts in different areas of technology, so translation management experts, neural machine translation experts, and then ourselves as the data management glue that ties it all together. And then we work with the customer to agree what their first thin slice would be. In this case, it was to just have an end-to-end publishing process, so not even any translation, just to take English content and publish it. So we delivered a thin slice which established the ownership, access, and technology principles across the board. In this case, we did that using AWS and bespoke development. And then we moved on with them to deliver further thin slices to as specific language translations, different types of translation. And we're working with them now to do things like Hebrew, which is obviously a right to left language, and they're continuing to add thin slices on their solution over the last 2 years, and there's still a 3-year roadmap to keep building more slices that's been laid out. A second customer we've worked with, their aspiration was to provide a machine learning AI-based booking intelligence to their platform. As soon as we started talking to them, our values started coming through, and we realized they were a long way away from being able to achieve that. They didn't have the data that would allow them to train a machine learning or AI engine. So we worked with them to agree what the first thin slice was, which was just to simply take their booking system and build a new one based on business rules and start gathering the data that would be needed. So that was a hard conversation. Of course, they were disappointed that they couldn't achieve this vision that they had, but they understood that they needed to take the thin slice approach and work towards it incrementally. So we're now working with them to apply analytics and reporting on that data set that we built, and we're still working towards that machine learning AI based objective, but there are many slices between where we are now and that point. And finally, a third customer we've worked with in the thin slice model. So they were a very large global organization with a scattered hybrid infrastructure. So we helped them implement a series of vertical slices to establish an AWS account platform and then migrate towards it. We also worked through quite a few horizontal slices. So we were working vertically to go around different business departments in the business and migrate them to AWS in the cloud. But we also delivered some horizontal slices, but these were very limited to quite low-level technology areas where we could minimize the business impacts. And we did this as a global team. So we were using our teams in the UK, Mexico, and India, all working collaboratively in that DevOps model to migrate them to the cloud. So there's some real-life examples where we follow the data delta methods, the thin slice approach, and our ethos around technology to deliver business value for our customers. So finally, I'd like to return to the values slide that I had at the beginning, and hopefully you've seen some of these values shining through in our process. So we employ brutal honesty wherever possible. So we have effectively stopped projects in the past we felt the approach was unlikely to deliver that business value that motivates us. So that was very much a one-off project where the customer was determined to do it, and we diverted them to a thin slice approach, which eventually delivered the outcomes they were looking for, but in a more structured way that had a higher probability of success. We generally care about business value, so we want to see our customers have successful projects. That's why we have a strong opinion on how we structure them, and we have a strong philosophy of how we approach them. And we work together, so we don't have a single technology tool or process. We work with the customer to make sure we work together to a mutual benefit. So that's the end of the webinar. So in terms of what's next, so there are a number of webinars being performed today. We have some white papers and case studies on the website. I gave you a little snippet of the Data Delta process. There is a Data Delta book which is available as a free download on the Victor Davis website, and I've only scratched the surface on that. In terms of any questions?
Yes. So you gave us some case studies that were your positive stories.
Yep.
What's the worst example you've seen?
The worst example we've seen is probably the one I referred to in the values, in that we were engaged with a customer who were determined to build an entire cloud data platform in the cloud in a year. Was their objective, and we're not involved at the beginning of the initiative. We were involved about we were brought in a quarter of the way through, in the context of it wasn't going very well. And the first thing we said, we explained why it wasn't going well, and we were met with a lot of consternation. And we were asked if we were effectively asking them to cancel the project and we'd not take any further revenue from it, and we said yes. So that was the worst case. It was changing their entire business in a year was their objective. So it was a bad story that turned into a good story ultimately, because we helped them through it and we delivered what they wanted, but just wasn't in a year.
There was a question about timeframes here as well. You
Yep.
mentioned that project
Yep.
biting off more than they could chew in a year.
Yep.
How long, you talked about the thin slice approach,
Mm-hmm.
How long, what's the timeline for that? How long does it take?
We recommend a thin slice is 6 months or less. Anything beyond 6 months, you're very much risking that business process, people or technology change. You're also risking people losing interest in the initiative and not trusting it. So 6 months is the maximum. I try and encourage 3 months for a benefit delivery.
Okay, and there's a budget question as well. How much does this cost?
It very much depends on what you're trying to achieve. So the beauty of the thin slice approach is that you can identify the areas where you can get business value very quicker at minimal investment. So I think certainly the thin slices at the very beginning of your initiative can be very cost effective and deliver high value. Often as you work through the slices and get onto the horizontal slices or the latter slices where the value has dropped off or the effort is higher, then it tends to get a bit more costly. But by that point, you are getting some cost benefits of having a platform in place that you can build upon, and there's less barriers.
Okay, let me just see if there are any more come through. I haven't got anything else here, in which case, then I think we say thank you very much to everybody for attending. You will get copies of the slides and the recording of the session, and we hope you tune in again soon to another one of our sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.